Imagine if every time you spoke, you changed somebody's life. Just imagine if your words had the power to inspire somebody so deeply that you could actually alter their life's trajectory for their good. As Christians who are on a mission to know Christ and to make Him known, one of the most crucial skills that we can acquire is the ability to speak words of life with a purpose. And I want to give a quick example through a story here in the book of Luke that shows what's possible when we speak words of life with purpose. So this takes place after the resurrection of Jesus. There are two disciples on a 7-mile journey to a place called Emmaus. And as they were walking, they were sad because they did not understand the scriptures. And Jesus approaches them and says, "What are you guys talking about?" And they explained to Him everything that they saw and witnessed and what they thought would happen with the Christ. You know, how He was a great prophet, how He was to be the Messiah, He was to save Israel, but now He's dead and buried. And then the women who went to His tomb saw that He wasn't even there anymore. And they're confused, they're perplexed, and they're sad. And how does Jesus respond to them? He says, "You guys are foolish, slow of mind to understand all that was in the scriptures." And He began explaining to them, starting with Moses, going through the prophets, everything that was to come of the Christ and what His life was to look like. And as they got to where they were going, they urged Him, saying, "Please stay with us," because He acted like He was going to keep on going, but He's playing it cool. He's got a purpose here in this conversation. So He's acting like He's going to move on, but they said, "Please come and stay with us. We want to hear more." And they sat down to break bread with Jesus. And when He broke bread, their eyes were opened. They saw who He was, and instantly He vanished. Now, that's a whole story of its own right there. But what they said when they saw who He was, they said, "Were not our hearts burning within us while He was speaking to us on the road, explaining to us the scriptures?" And how did they respond to that? Instantly, that very hour, it says that they returned back to Jerusalem another 7 miles by foot, and it is dark at this point. It's nighttime. So the words that Jesus spoke to them had so much power that instantly their reason for going to Emmaus was unimportant, and they headed back the same journey that they just walked because Christ said something to them that changed their hearts and caused them to think differently and have a different motivation for what they were doing with their lives. Now, when Jesus spoke to them, it wasn't magic that opened the disciples' eyes. It was the power of the Holy Spirit being spoken in love and with a purpose. And you might think because He's Jesus, you know, He's God, right? So, of course, He can speak and open up people's eyes and open up their hearts because He's God. He just has the power to do that. But it didn't quite work that way with the Pharisees because their eyes were not opened, their hearts were not opened. And Jesus, dare I say, couldn't get to their hearts because they were unwilling. So it's more than just doing miracles or doing signs and doing these miraculous things to get through to people. It's not just because He was God that He opened up their hearts. It's because of how He spoke to them. The way that Jesus got to the heart of these two disciples was by listening to the things that filled their hearts. He listened to what their cares were, what their concerns were. He listened, and then He responded. He asked them, "What are you guys talking about?" And then they share what they're saying. He's like, "What things?" He wants to go deeper and hear what they're talking about, because before He speaks a word into their lives, He wants to listen so He knows who He's speaking to and how to communicate to them. Now, it's not enough to just be nice and to be kind to people. That's not what speaking words of life is. It's more than just treating them well. It's knowing how to speak to them and how to communicate in a way that their heart can understand and resonate with. And that may be easy to receive at times. That may be hard to receive at times. But when you're tactful and you have a purpose in the way that you're speaking, you can get through that stuff and speak to the heart of a person so that they can actually be changed. And He asks this question, which is the most important part. Because after listening to their hearts and after calling them fools, slow of mind, He asks this question: was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and to enter into His glory? And that is a bit of a rhetorical question because He's going to go deeper into that. But He knows that question is going to stir their hearts because they want to understand and they want to hear more. And so he knows how to unlock the door into their hearts. Now, it wasn't until he broke bread that their eyes were opened and that they recognized who Jesus was. But what does it say their response was? Were not our hearts burning within us when he spoke to us on the road and explained the scriptures to us? On the road, even before they knew who was speaking, their hearts were being stirred within them. And again, that's because Jesus took the time to first listen and to know who he was speaking to and how to speak to them. So what can we learn from this story, and how can we acquire the same skill of speaking words of life into others? The first thing is listening to what's truly inside someone's heart. Paying attention to what it is that moves them. What are the things that spark joy? What are the things that spark sorrow? In taking the time to listen, you become aware of who you're truly speaking to, and that insight gives you the best chance to speak words of life into somebody and to change their hearts and to push them in the direction that they need to go in order to pursue Christ. Now, I say gives you the chance to do that because not everyone is willing to receive. Like the Pharisees, Christ actually wasn't able to get through to them because they weren't willing. But don't let their hardness of heart be your excuse for not giving them the chance to receive words of life. Because it's very easy to just write off people and just assume they're not going to hear it. Why bother? It's not our responsibility to judge how they're going to receive it. We have the responsibility to speak and to communicate life-giving words to make Christ known. And if they don't receive it, that's between them and God. But we can't be the people to say, they're not going to hear it, so why speak? You know, that just becomes a very easy way out. So it's our duty and our prerogative as Christians to be willing to speak and willing to listen and to know when to move on after we've spoken to someone who is willing and able to receive. Another thing we can learn from this is that when you live to know Christ and to make him known, whatever your destination was, generally isn't as important. And you realize that people are actually the destination. No longer are people a means to an end or a means to a destination, and no longer are people an inconvenience to your destination. And what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, where was Jesus even going? What was he trying to do, and where was he trying to get? I don't believe he had a destination. I think these two disciples, that's where he was going. He's walking along, he sees two guys talking, he's like, here we go, here's the opportunity. That's when you have a heart that is seeking God the Father and wanting to make his kingdom known, make his name known. You start to see people as the destination. The first thing he did was he approached them and he started traveling along with them. This is why he wakes up in the morning. This is why he came to this earth, to testify to the truth. So this is his purpose, his destination. People are no longer an inconvenience. Isn't that wonderful? And it says again when they got to Emmaus that Jesus was acting like he was going to go on further. But they brought him in and he opened up their eyes. And what's the first thing they did when their eyes were opened up? They returned back to Jerusalem. Why? Because suddenly telling others of the thing inside them that has now been changed, this understanding that they now have, is the most important thing, that they're willing to do this inconvenient journey back to Jerusalem to tell others. That's what happens when your life is changed. When someone speaks a word of life into you and it takes root and inspires you in the deepest place, you can't help but to share it. It suddenly becomes the most important thing to you. When they saw who Christ was, it burned within them so much that they literally backtracked and made the inconvenient journey back to Jerusalem. And isn't that just what humans do? Whenever something in our hearts is burning within us, whether it's sorrow or joy, we have to tell people, and we want them to resonate with us. The problem is when we do it selfishly, and we just want people to feed us, and so we're giving them this news that feeds our flesh. That's different than when your heart's been changed and you have something in you that's eternally bearing fruit, which is the Word of God, the life that comes through Christ, that suddenly is so important that you'll live a life of inconvenience to make people hear this Word. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to speak to people and to share the Word and to make His name known. But man, it's worth it. If something inside of you has taken root and you're convinced of this thing, then it's worth every bit of inconvenience to reach people and to make His Word known. So just imagine for a second, if every time you spoke, you could move somebody to the point that their lives are forever altered. That's the life I want to live. That's the way I want to speak and to communicate. There's a verse from 1 Peter that says, everyone who speaks is to do so as one who is speaking the utterances of God. What a standard that is. And I don't think Peter says that as if it's some unattainable thing. He's saying this is what we should strive for, to speak as if it's God speaking, because we have the power to change somebody's life if we're willing to be intentional about it, and to listen, and to speak, and to do the inconvenient things of reaching people rather than places. The moment we discover our true calling and our unique role in God's kingdom is the moment that we have clarity and an understanding on how we're supposed to speak to people, how we're supposed to communicate, and what our relationship is supposed to look like. It's not just one-sided anymore. I'm not just making friends to get something out of them. I'm actually in their lives and invested in their lives because there's something that is so important that I want them to hear this. And if you want help finding your calling in God's kingdom, I made a video here that you can check out. It's all about understanding what God desires of you with your life and what it is you want to do with your life and how those two things actually are supposed to coexist. So if you want, you can feel free to check that out. Today is your chance to speak words of life and to make a lasting impact in God's kingdom. What will you do with it?